I never learned the acronym.
I have no idea either.
I is that an important thing to learn? I mean,
University Radio Falmer? No?
all the
Yeah.
websites and everything it just says URF. So really, University Radio Falmer makes sense. But it's not that important of a thing to learn. I mean, the most important thing is to learn there are a handful of buttons in front of you, and you have to press the right one to turn your microphone on. I know some people that have fucked that up as well, right? Oh no, it's not 7 o'clock yet. Have I just?
Yeah, you've just introed about
I've just. Well, no, it's not 7 o'clock. I've just sworn before the watershed. I'm sorry for swearing, right? 20 seconds before the allowed swearing. This is great, by the way. This is an amazing start. I've just sworn, I mean, how long until my official time,
I think you've got about...
I've got 5 seconds now. I've got 5
literally.
seconds. One swear word doesn't hurt, right? Think politicians do. I mean, well, in Australia, now
you can do it.
Now I can click the attendance sheet that's in front of me. I'm signed in. It has the name of my show. That's incredible. And we're on the website. It says we're live. We've got viewers. Well, I can't tell. I haven't figured out how to use. They didn't tell. That's back end stuff. That's not important for me. But anyway,
I'm sure we've got hundreds.
Welcome, hundred thousands,
if not thousands, surely.
Maybe even the tens of thousands. I mean, the United Kingdom is a massive population. Surely all of them are aware that this is happening right now, and they've all dropped whatever they're doing. Hopefully, if what they were doing wasn't a hot object, but Anyway, welcome. This is episode 1. Clearly, I've got I'm not going to say esteem because you haven't earned that yet.
Nah, definitely not.
Somewhat well-respected future economist, I guess, Lukas D. Matteo. Is that how I pronounce that?
Yeah, got that spot on.
Are you Northern Italian or Southern Italian?
Southern, I believe. Sicilian.
Well, you saying you believe makes me think you're Northern Italian, because normally the Southern Italians are the ones that care about that stuff, right? But I mean, you're listening to The Deep End right now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's lovely to be here in this studio.
It's a room.
Yeah.
I think a studio implies at least multiple rooms. I'm not sure. There's a corridor next to us? I'm not sure. Does that count as a room? It's half a room at least.
It's got a door, no window.
Yeah.
I think it does.
I mean, first episode, so it's not going to be as polished as one would hope, right? Are you Lucas, in the other chair across from me, are you familiar with the show Adult Swim? Well, not the show, the American programming block.
No. You need to tell me about that.
So you're familiar with Cartoon Network, right?
Yeah.
So after a certain time of day, Cartoon Network turns into effectively a separate network called Adult Swim, and when this happens, they have this big announcement thing, and they've got some animated graphics, and you have this American announcer, and he says, "Kids, get out of the pool. It's time for Adult Swim," and I feel like that's the perfect. I need to get on that. I need to develop something like that. I mean, my show is roughly nautical themed, I guess. It's called The Deep End. If you look at my graphic, it's got an anchor. It's blue. It's blue. It's got an anchor. It's got a squid. It's got a diving guy with a harpoon. That took me ages to make, by the way, in Google Drawings. I'm not sure why I came up with this name months ago, and then they just didn't let me have a show until now.
So it's been in the archives for a while.
Archives. Yeah. But thankfully, we're here now, and I've got a fantastic guest such as yourself, ready to talk about what. But before we introduce what we're going to be even talking about to the audience, I think they need to understand who you are and why they should even give a, past 7 o'clock, I can say it, fuck as to why you matter and why they should listen to you.
Agreed. So I'm Lucas. I'm a final year economics student here at the University of Sussex. I did a placement year last year doing financial planning and analysis in a travel technology company. I captained the men's badminton team in my second year as well. So I'd say I've done a few bits and bobs, so there might be some bits that people can learn. Travel
technology, you're not making the aeroplanes, are you?
No.
And you're not making well, to be fair, the trains in this country don't travel, do they? So what do you do what do you mean when you say travel technology? What specific?
So the company I was working at provided the kind of interface that travel agents use. So they'll take all the data. So, for example, the seat availabilities from airlines, and would put that into a user-friendly platform that a travel agent can do their bookings on, and then book for their customers essentially.
Okay. Do you get a lot of business in that? I mean, I travel a lot, mate. Just last week, allegedly, I can neither confirm nor deny where I was at any given moment. But just last week, I was on holiday in the Balkans, right? Montenegro, Bosnia, Serbia. I'm not going to say lovely places because, yeah, I mean, they're all right. But I use Skyscanner to get my flights. To get my buses, I just Google the two cities I want to go to, right? But with stuff like Skyscanner, with stuff like Google Flights even, which is just a worse version of Skyscanner, plus probably a dozen other travel aggregators, you know, how do you even, not as a travel agent, but as somebody who would provide resources to travel agents, how do you justify, no offense, your existence?
It is true. I think as well, I mean, we're both young. We're quite tech savvy, I'd like to say. So we can go online and we can do those bookings ourselves. We can organise it all. I think where it plays a part especially is, for example, big groups, maybe groups of 10, groups of 20, older generations who aren't as good with the tech, who need that kind of guidance and help when they're booking. As well, I think regional. So in the UK, it's probably not so much the biggest market, but definitely in America, I think it's quite a popular option to go to a travel agent, you know, get them to sort it out. And it's much easier. Like, you just go there, they do it for you, and it's nice and easy.
I suppose now that I'm thinking about it, I've had a couple of times in which I've had to use in which people I know would have benefited from a travel agent. For a couple of years ago, in my first year of university, I was going on holiday with six, or I'm not gonna say those two numbers consecutively, but around six other people, right? And we were booking flights with Ryanair, right? And with Ryanair, you have a price that's listed on your phone, but if somebody else manages to snag that price, then it's suddenly gone up. So because I was the one with the information that I was presenting to everyone else, I was able to get my flight for a certain number of pounds, but the final person in the group to have booked it, well, they were looking at about £10 to £15 higher than us, and that's not just because, you know, there's a certain number of seats at certain prices, but probably the algorithm saw there's a bunch of people looking for this specific price right now. They're probably a group, let's shaft the last guy in the line.
The dynamic pricing.
But also, I mean, actually, even then, thinking about a Skyscanner, when, like, so I live in Hong Kong, and so if I'm trying to go on holiday somewhere from Hong Kong, the options on what airlines I could use are very different than if I'm trying to fly out of Gatwick or Stansted, for example. So for last December, I believe, I was on holiday to Cambodia with my mum, and if I looked at Skyscanner, I wasn't necessarily getting the best deals because there's a lot of flights in Europe that Skyscanner does. I mean, Wizz Air, Ryanair, EasyJet going to be heavy contributors to that. But when you're looking at domestic flights in Cambodia or even budget airlines out of Hong Kong or Japan, I don't think they've expanded their database all that far. So is that something that you were working on? Is trying to make sure that you're really getting everything under the sun at some of these companies?
So I think a lot of it was those kind of countries where, for example, as you mentioned, the Skyscanners, they weren't really in that area as prominently. So where a travel agent's expertise comes in and really does, you know, they know what's good and what's not really. So they're able to get you what you want on your holiday, which is what people want. Like, you know, if you're spending a lot of money, you're going to want what you want. So.
I mean, I try to, my cap on how much I'm willing to spend on flights is normally about £60. I've gone as low as far as I remember, I did £16 return to Dublin and £18 return to Albania, which is incredible.
It's a steal, yeah.
Although one of those was flying out of Stansted, so I had to spend like 3 times as much on the train ticket. But that's something we'll get into later, is the unfortunate reality of rail travel in the United Kingdom. But, so yeah, you mentioned that you did a placement year.
Yeah.
So you were in the job market.
I was employed.
And in a few months from now, I mean, you graduate in May, I would assume. That's 7 months from now?
7-8 months, yeah.
You're going to have to get an actual job. Given the state of things that we're seeing right now in the UK, where the job market is already so saturated and is getting more and more saturated day by day for other reasons that we'll get into. Are you confident, or are you pissing yourself right now?
Well, to be honest with you, I think there was a statistic somewhere which was saying for these graduate roles, there's about 140 applicants for each one, and at that number, there's so many. Everyone's got their selling points, so it's competitive out there. It's going to be tough, but I think hopefully, fingers crossed, I can sort something out for when I finish uni. But as you said, given the jobs market at the moment, might have to wait, might have to work part-time for a bit, and I think that's pretty normal at the moment. You get a lot of graduates who come out of uni and you can't get a job. Like, it's definitely something that needs fixing. How exactly? That's could ramble on for hours about that. But
Yeah, I think one thing I've heard a lot of people bring up is the effect that Brexit has had on the job market in the United Kingdom, where theoretically, maybe however long ago the United Kingdom was in the EU, you as a British citizen would be able to go abroad and get a job. But when we actually get into the nitty gritty of that, is that even really would that really have even been an option, or would it have been a case of the other way around, where you're getting people from countries like Latvia or Lithuania more coming to the UK? And in fact, I'd say an interesting thing to think about is, do we already have a microcosm of that EU sort of pyramid of where people are going for jobs in the UK already? I imagine you study economics. I imagine you worked in London, right?
not far out. Yeah, on the outskirts.
You're within the sort of orbit of London.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, you think, as a football fan myself, I can name a lot of cities in the UK, but when I actually start to think about why I know these places, football team, the Beatles, football team, guy that punched a horse, there's not really much going on anywhere outside London in the UK. Is that something that you think is a reality, that jobs and the economy in general is becoming more and more concentrated around the UK's capital?
I mean, it's an interesting point. I mean, one thing you have got to take into account, London's population, obviously is over 10 million now. So what's that, about a seventh of the UK population lives there? So it does make sense that a lot of the jobs are centred there and a lot of people are employed there. But I don't think it's all London. I think there are a lot of other big cities that employ a lot of people. But I do think London probably has, in terms of population, the biggest reach.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's sort of cyclical in nature. I mean, I imagine that London obviously generates the most amount of tax money for the government, and therefore a large proportion, and given how things tend to go with how with how government resources are distributed, some of that is going from London into these other areas. But it's really a never-ending cycle, you know. People go to London to get a job, and then if they decide to start their own business, they're starting it in London. And I mean, how the population of the UK is rising somewhat, right?
Yeah.
And is there something that we can see that maybe would indicate that London is growing at a disproportionate rate to the rest of the country, or am I?
I mean, I imagine if you looked at kind of GDP growth, GDP per capita across cities, I imagine London's up there. The highest earners are there, so it would make sense. In terms of population, it is growing a lot, especially since COVID. So population increase per year between 2010 and 19 was about 400,000.
Wow.
And then post-COVID, 2022 to 2024 was about 750,000 that our population's growing. So,
jeez.
Yeah.
How, well, my first thought was, how are you finding the space for that? But from what I know, you're really not, are you?
Yeah.
So, what sort of job are you expecting to get then when you graduate? Are you was the travel technology industry something that you were just able to get into because it was available, or is that something that you actually think you're going to have a passion in, or are you more of the banker type?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think when you're applying to these placements, you really don't know what you're getting into because you don't have that work experience in any industry really. You might have had part-time jobs, in a bar, in a retail shop, but you're not really in a getting expertise in the industry. So for me, the travel technology was very interesting. Gained a lot of skills that are transferable. Would I go back into it? Possibly. Um, Definitely could. It's interesting enough. I think when I'm first starting my career, I want something a bit more, for example, a finance company. So you can really get that expertise in finance, and then you can branch out to these other sectors or industries.
I mean, well, even from the way that you justified the existence of these travel tech companies earlier, it does seem like a declining industry. So it'll be interesting to see how many people are out of jobs, because I mean, when you said it was sort of a lot of older people who can't get into using technology and stuff, eventually, morbid thought, but that population is not going to exist anymore. And when it's certain countries that haven't necessarily been integrated into these online spaces anymore, eventually that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I think that is definitely something that I'm sure they all know about, are trying to work towards adapting. Obviously, with all this automation, AI stuff as well, it might be as simple as you ask, your laptop to just type in, "Can you book me flights here to here?" and it might do it for you in 10, 20 years time. We don't know.
Although hopefully before people start doing that, they actually, for the time being, you need to double check what you are hearing on AI. For example, there was a recent story. A Spanish couple booked flights to Puerto Rico, and they asked ChatGPT if they needed to get a visa. ChatGPT said, "No, no, don't worry about it. Spanish passport, you'll get in just fine." No, Puerto Rico, part of the United States, as autonomous as they are, and these Spanish people got turned away at the border, had to fly back.
Agreed. I do think AI as well, a lot of it does spew out rubbish, and it does need to be checked. But I think for sort of repeated manual tasks, it does have the potential to really speed things up. But again, it's about teaching it, making sure it knows the process inside and out, so that you're really able to get the best out of it.
Even then, though, repeated manual tasks, I'm not sure if that's the best thing for the job market at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of beauty in redundancy. You know, um, a lot of jobs exist because we need somebody to grease the wheels. We need a lot of people who serve as bulwarks against silly decisions, right? And when we're seeing the job market as clustered as it is, I mean, you said 140 graduates applying for one position, and that's just getting worse. I don't think introducing AI into that crowded of a space is going to be a good thing. I mean, the population in the UK is increasing, but GDP hasn't gone anywhere. I think I saw something that said GDP per capita has only just overtaken what it was in the UK in 2008. And population's increasing. How much is that affecting everything?
Well, yeah, you mentioned per capita, so obviously population increasing is going to spread that out a bit more. You would think that population increasing would lead to more kind of growth, more GDP, that sort of stuff. But, the population we're gaining, how many of, how much of that is really adding a lot of value and is in those high kind of growth jobs?
Yeah, I mean, the government's spending a lot of money on people that aren't necessarily productive. For one, we're not going to get into why, some people are productive or not, but there's certainly a tax burden at play. There's certainly, I mean, it's sort of the curse of any developed economy that once you reach a certain standard of living, you have a large swath of your population that isn't necessarily willing to do a large amount of jobs. And so, the country needs to import people to sort of fill that demand. But the thing is, are we getting, I'm not British, as much as my accent deceives, yeah, I get offended when people call me English. I'm a proud German myself. But is the country getting the number of people right that are being brought in?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good question. Um, I mean, increasing population. I mean, I don't know if you say you're not from the UK, but trying to get stuff like a GP appointment can take a while, and that probably is a lot in part due to the mass population we've got, and obviously, as we mentioned before, a lot of the jobs, there aren't that many, so a lot of these doctors, nurses, GPs, we don't have as many, and we've got this bigger population. How do we sort that? Like, it's definitely a tough question.
I mean, there's a genuine issue with the most productive sectors, the most productive groups within the British population. They're aging out of productivity. They're not giving as much money to the government as they were previously, and now there's larger groups coming in that aren't contributing. That, you know, and you can say that we have an obligation to fund these people and make sure that they have a comfortable life. But the reality of the situation is, and it's part of the reason why I imagine Keir Starmer's under so much pressure right now up in Downing Street is the street that they're on,
Yep.
right?
Yeah,
I don't know many streets. I know Baker Street from Sherlock Holmes, but that's about it. But where are the books balanced? You know, I know that some nations publish statistics on which groups, like how taxation and net tax contributions are working. Is the UK reaching a situation in which the welfare state, something which is so incredibly valuable, is no longer able to be supported? I mean, and we've seen before in other countries what sort of consequences can arise when a nation that bills itself as a welfare state. Look at Russia, for example. Vladimir Putin's largest supporter base, despite the war in Ukraine, well, if anything, they're even more supportive of him because of the war in Ukraine, is the elderly population, right? They get a certain amount of money per month in exchange for having worked their entire lives for the state. And every time the Russian government attempts to either lower the amount that they're getting or raise the retirement age, there are protests in the streets. And that's really the only time that people are able to protest without the government cracking down on them. So, I mean, what the United Kingdom, how much are we giving out in benefits to people that aren't contributing positively? And in fact, I mean, I know that a lot of it's a stereotype. A lot of British people are going abroad to places like Australia to find better work. Would you say that we're at risk of having the welfare state collapse under its own weight?
I wouldn't have thought so. I think, redistribution, collecting the taxes, spreading it, equally as we can amongst all the citizens, it has been shown to be better for the country and produce better growth. Up until a point, there is a point where, you're taxing so much and redistributing so much that actually does become negative. And I think it's about finding that kind of right balance. So yeah, I think it's definitely a complicated matter, but I do think at the moment the UK is still very good compared to a lot of other nations globally.
I mean, redistribution of wealth, that's something that, I mean, I studied GCSE economics, so I know a little bit of what I'm talking about, but I know that the redistribution of wealth is one of the core principles of a state, or at least what the government should be, or what a central bank should be trying to do. Isn't Keir Starmer facing pushback at the moment for trying to increase taxes on the highest percentage? And as much as I agree, we need people who have too much to pay their fair share in order to support the people that consume their products, that allow them to live with the standards that they have. Isn't the current globalized system of economics, of money, making it more difficult for governments to try and crack down on the immense hoarding of wealth? I know Norway they increased taxes on the top 1% by maybe 1 or 2% even, and they ended up losing money because these people are able to just flee.
Yep. And
go to places like the Bahamas, like Singapore, like Brunei or Monaco, which don't have either taxes on income or taxes on arguably the more important category of capital gains.
Yep, definitely. I think it's definitely an important issue, and obviously now that with globalization, with money, how easy it is to flow around the world, it's very easy for the very rich to just essentially get up and leave. Like, if, in the UK they increase taxes, ultimately the wealthy are going to try and avoid it. they will just move, as you said, to places like Monaco where it's less tax, even tax free, and they can do this. I mean, a lot of wealthy people will have assets, like houses in all over the world, different countries. So whatever benefits them, they will move there and try keep as much money as they can. Really.
Yeah, it's a really difficult topic. I mean, as much as I am my own political views on that topic is I'm very protectionist. I believe that there should be more barriers to trade so that companies and people are encouraged to keep their wealth within their nation and help the lower rungs of their society move upwards. But at the same time, I'm born and raised in Hong Kong. My mum was born and raised in Hong Kong. My family is a Hong Kong family, and really the only reason that Hong Kong exists is as a gateway for these people to move their money into other places and to move their industries into other places so that they can keep more for themselves. No matter what side you on the of the political spectrum you lie on, it's difficult. There's pros and there's cons on either side. I mean, specifically with the redistribution of wealth in order to make sure that people are able to cope with rising prices and all that, what would you say needs to be done?
I mean, if we took it on a global level, for example, so we mentioned how people might, move abroad, avoid taxes. Say, for example, I don't know how, but if they could somehow all the countries coordinate a global tax, for example, on people above a certain wealth, where you can't just move countries and dodge it. So they're still going to collect that revenue and can then redistribute it. I think that would definitely be something that would be beneficial. Obviously, the ins and outs of it are difficult. For example, you have this, global tax for the very wealthy. Which country does it go to? Stuff like that. Where does that money go? It's definitely a difficult thing, but I do think that, you tax the ultra wealthy, the top 1% in the world. If you tax them, even 20%, I'm pretty sure it could solve a lot of the issues globally that we're seeing, poverty, a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I remember there was a famous interaction on social media a while ago with everybody's least controversial figure, Elon Musk, right? Never, of course, somebody that everybody can always agree on, right? But somebody involved with the World Bank tagged him in a social media post saying that if he just donated something like 1% of his wealth, then world poverty could be solved. And then he himself responded saying, okay, tell me how this would work. But, I mean, the unfortunate reality is, as much as everyone would love to say that, as much as everyone wants to be Robin Hood, right, and take from the rich and give to the poor, yeah, like you said, how do we do that? You'd have to get every single country in the world on board, and when there are certain countries, like Monaco or Singapore, that exist purely, or like the Bahamas, better example, that basically exist purely as a parking lot for rich people's money, how would you ever get those guys on board? You
Exactly.
probably wouldn't. And then again, and just as you brought up, who would the money go to? You could say, oh, the country of origin of the billionaire, but then you'd probably have somebody else protesting that, like, oh, well, if they live here, then we should get some of that. Or you could say you distribute it globally by percentage of population, but then you'd have the countries with more billionaires protesting. I mean, it's one of those questions that we just can't answer. There's a lot of that out there.
Agreed. Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. One definitely for far more clever people in the realm of economics than both myself and you. But I guess it is something that, if they could make work, it could be good. But again, yeah, the population, distributing based on population, distributing based on who needs it the most, it's always going to raise questions. It's always going to be tough.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
It's one of those, I mean, although something that's good for people like you, at least, or people studying economics like yourself, is that there are nowadays more than ever more of these questions going around. For example, a big issue that I don't pay as much attention as I should when I'm ordering my groceries, but inflation is a massive thing. I mean, the only statistic on inflation that I can quote is that beer prices have raised something like 1,200% over the last 20 years. But what's I know that the average person in the United Kingdom is really hurting right now. You know that because we're seeing a lot more competition for goods, we're seeing a lot more demand. What can you share some insight into what exactly is going on?
Yeah, so inflation in recent years in the UK has been higher than I imagine the Bank of England would want it to be. So just as a kind of guideline, Bank of England look for about 2% inflation per year. Between 2010 and 2019, it was pretty much dead on 2%. Between 2021 and 2024, so just after we came out of that COVID period, annual average is about 5%, with 2022 having a significant spike. I mean, I think it's pretty understandable after COVID, when everything is closed, we probably saw, yeah, like very little inflation. There's that big rebound. Everyone's out again spending. Great. But then I think another thing that kind of drove this is utility prices. So, oil and gas. So
is that oil and gas, were like home utilities?
yeah, so I think, we've had global conflicts, obviously Russia, big exporter of this stuff. So it's a double whammy in a sense. It impacts both the prices, general population pay. So for example, we're renting at uni. Our utility bills have definitely noticeably gone up since first year. But then as well as this, if you look at businesses, their operating costs are going to go up, and that's going to hit you through, for example, food prices of everyday goods, and even like clothes and stuff that are just nice to have.
So I mean, the obvious thing is, right, inflation normally rises when people are spending money, right? But more and more we're seeing people are spending less and less money. So when inflation's going up and people are spending less money, but inflation just keeps going up, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one, and it is going to require a lot of balancing. So obviously,
especially with, I
yeah,
mean, you mentioned utilities,
yeah,
right? When the government is cutting stuff like the winter fuel allowance, that's just hurting people more.
yeah, agreed. So as well as you can get all the facts and figures, but there's also going to be the opinion of the people, where great prices have increased, which is obviously bad, but people are going to notice and it's going to hurt, as you said. So yeah, it's quite tricky how the UK can get out of this. I mean, look, Bank of England, if they lower interest rates, it would mean people would probably save less, so spend more, which then we have more, people are spending more, but inflation's going to go up. But then you've got this thing where, how do we balance that? Like, it's definitely a tricky question.
And I suppose people have already started to notice. I mean,
Yeah.
in Indonesia, for example, we're seeing student unions organizing protests against the government because the government's trying to cut back on student allowances, and the prices are rising and things are just getting harder. Same thing in the United States. That was one of the most prevalent issues that decided that election between Trump and Harris was what was it? The price of eggs going really high. That was a common sticking point, and then I think they've still gone higher, right?
Yeah.
But in the UK, when was the last general election in the UK?
Question. I think it wasn't too long ago, was it?
Yeah, how long has Keir Starmer? Keir Starmer became Prime Minister in 2024, right? 5th of July. So he's been in the job for about a year, and that was inflation. I mean, you were paying attention more than me, probably, right? Because I was back in Hong Kong at that point, Plus I'd only been in the UK for a year. I hadn't really come to grips with British society as a whole. Was inflation a very big issue in that election, or?
It still was, yeah. So I wouldn't, we can look at different political parties in power. I think the underlying issues are still there. And I think whichever party would be in power, it'd be a difficult thing to manage. But Yeah, it's definitely a tricky question. Um, how they fix it is tough. I mean, I know last year's budget, you know, increases to businesses' national insurance, which meant obviously businesses are paying more for their employees.
Well,
So
so national insurance, what is that? Is that a pension scheme
it's kind of like money. No, it's kind of like money that the government collects from businesses and people.
for what? Just
Yeah,
general
just
allocation money, or
yeah, kind of like tax in a sense.
so
Um,
so it's not really some. So it's not like a pension scheme. It's just
no, 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 no,
it's
no.
just a business tax.
Pretty much, and it individuals as well. And she increased that on businesses. Obviously, this puts the cost of having employees up. So a lot of these, lower margin, kind of budget shops got hit quite hard when their wage, kind of the amount they're paying for their employees, goes up quite a lot.
Yeah.
There's inevitably going to be, redundancies or not hiring as much. So
I
that's
mean,
also contributed a lot.
We've seen that even on our own university campus. Northfield Bar's gone.
Yeah,
Popular fixture of the community. it's
I know.
not allowed to get into that, right? But yeah, the bar's gone, and one of the reasons that we were given was it wasn't profitable. And I imagine stuff like government tax increases is going to heavily contribute to that, especially under a Labour government, because I mean Labour bills themselves, right, as the party of the people, the party of the working man. So you would have imagined inflation would have been one of their highest priorities, but I don't think we've seen anything about that. Has inflation increased under them, or have they tried to steady the ship?
Not too sure, to be honest. A lot of the inflation stuff is also work from the Bank of England, so they'll have a big say and a lot of influence on how we manage that. But again, I think there was talk of this budget coming up in the autumn that normal tax, like the 20%, the 40% you get, is going to increase as well. So I mean, that's on people rather than businesses. So that's going to be felt a lot. Whether that comes into play and is true is very tricky. But yeah, again, it kind of comes back to, if taxes increase again, people are going to try move away to different countries, different nations.
Especially with parties like, I mean, Reform is doing quite well I mean, the Conservatives are screwed, right? They're not doing well. But with Reform leading the polls, they're a party that wants to lower taxes.
Yeah.
That might not necessarily, I don't know, but that might not necessarily help even out the balance of income in the country.
It's definitely a tricky one, but yeah, I think it's hard. Lowering taxes, it could help. I mean, people have more money in their pocket, but then again, as we spoke about earlier, the kind of welfare, that sort of stuff, the government spending is going to get reduced. So it's definitely a tricky one, but
yeah, I mean, in general, I think we're living in a very, very weird time for economics. We didn't live through, I guess we kind of did, but we were like 4 or 5 years old. But we had the financial crash in 2008. COVID. Now we're seeing a lot of stuff with the AI market that a lot of people are calling bubbles.
Yeah.
That, God knows where that's going to go, especially with so many people, like retirement funds and everything going into investing in that. It's a weird time to be alive.
Definitely. And I think obviously COVID for our generation was probably the biggest thing we remember, and that kind of lack of mobility, lack of travel.
Yeah.
So I think people are probably now as well making up for that and traveling more places.
Yeah.
So
I've seen stats recently of the spending habits of younger people, especially like roughly our age and maybe the handful of years above us, spending on a category that economists are calling experiences is up massively. So that's stuff like travel, that's stuff like concerts. I mean, when we see a lot of people doing that, I mean, I go on holiday, we have friends that go to the concerts. There was a concert just outside a music festival just outside the uni campus a few weeks ago. Because I think a lot of people are, especially in our generation, are accepting that the traditional goods that the generations before us used to save for are largely out of reach, aren't they? Housing prices have gone up. There's a statistic from the United States that when you look at the average the median age of a home buyer in 1998, you take that and you compare it to the median age of a home buyer in 2018, you just add 20 years. It's the same people that were buying homes 30 years ago are buying homes today. And it's no wonder that a lot of young people are becoming disenfranchised, that a lot of more, I don't want to say radical because nobody knows what necessarily the definition of that is, but a lot more polarized political parties are getting a bit more airtime, right? It's a difficult place to be, and I wonder where this is all going to go.
It's true, yeah. I think as well, when you, as you said, rising house prices, if things like, buying a house eventually do seem unattainable to people, they are going to spend that money on, as you said, the experiences, the kind of travel, the festivals, that sort of stuff. So it's definitely an interesting one. I mean, where is the most common place that people are traveling nowadays?
From the UK, actually, that's an interesting thing, right? We're seeing a lot of, and I think that might be, the effects of it might be a little old, right? But we've seen a lot of places, like domestic travel is going down. So we're seeing, and that might be an effect of redistribution of income effectively, right? We're seeing a lot of people going from the UK to places like Malaga, Magaluf, other Spanish, Mallorca, other places that start with M in coastal Spain, right? Or, package holidays in Turkey, right? Because it's cheap, because it's affordable, right? You compare that to what things used to be. A lot of people used to pay a lot more money to go abroad. They used to pay more money to do things. And I think that's part of the reason why there's a little bit of friction in the way that our generation speaks to the generations before us as to our spending habits. We get a lot of flack for spending on experiences, right? On luxury goods. But when you look at how much a TV costs, how much a laptop costs, how much a cell phone costs in proportion to income, it's decreased dramatically. People used to have to save up to buy something like that. Nowadays, I mean, you don't even have to go to Temu to get a good deal. You can go to a place like, I don't know, but what's the British equivalent of Best Buy? Curry's.
Yeah, somewhere where you can get a decent deal.
Right? Or you can go on holiday. People used to have heard of hotels. You have like stuff like the Mandarin Oriental, or the Trump Tower. The Trump Tower in New York's a hotel, right? I'm just thinking of Home Alone at this point. But people used to go to hotels. They used to know these things. Now you go to hostels. You go to an Airbnb.
Airbnbs, big rise, yeah.
Although nowadays we are seeing a lot more regulation on stuff like that. I think California has laws preventing people from renting out their Airbnb, or like you can't rent out your entire room in places like in the state of Hesse in Germany. You can't rent out a flat on Airbnb. You can only rent out one room, and I guess that's the government attempting to alleviate some of the housing market stuff, right? But there used to be in the world, there used to be a chain of events. You go. And it's some of these promises that we were fed, which are seeming to have collapsed, right? You go to school, you go to college, you get a good job, you save up, you get a house, right? And a house is stability. There's no more rent after that. You're paying utilities, right? But even then, that used to be cheaper. It used to be minuscule compared to what it is now. And so when we get flack from these older generations for not following the same standard beaten path that they're used to, it doesn't, a lot of us, people our age, we brush it off because that reality doesn't exist anymore. The reality where you can get a good job and you can save up your money, you can have a house, you can even have a beach house, right? Vacation homes, that's gone, right? Now it's all about what I can have now because I know I'm probably not, unless I win some Charlie and the Chocolate Factory golden ticket, I'm not going to be able to afford this stuff, right? And I think a lot of work is going to have to be done, either from the government or from the people replacing that government by one way or another, right? I mean, look at Nepal right now. They elected a new prime minister over Discord, which is, as much as I appreciate a good public revolt, I mean, Discord, that's a bit far. it's a fundamentally unserious government at that point. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens, because you look at the stock market, you look at stuff like AI, you look at the job market, you look at the housing market. It all looks like we're driving on a road that hasn't been finished yet. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see if the car goes off the cliff or if somebody pulls the brakes. Right? Do you pull? I don't know if you pull brakes. I don't have a driver's license yet. It's ridiculous.
Push the pedal down, I believe.
Yeah, I was thinking more the handbrake. You know, because the handbrake is the more serious of the two brakes.
True, instant stop, isn't it?
Or you would hope so.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I think another thing you mentioned at the start, you know, is price of like trains and public transport in the UK
that's
as well.
That's something I just thought of when I mentioned the fucking road that isn't finished.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We can't even get finished trains.
No.
You know,
I mean,
that's
HS2.
another thing. That's another. Yeah, HS2 is ridiculous. I mean, we live in the Brighton area, right? God knows. I mean, Brighton's just a confused. Where are the limits in Brighton, right? What the hell is a hove? What's a Worthing, right? Get a grip, right? But here in the a lot of at our university at least, right? Living in the UK, you have a campus, right? Then people leave that campus once they have finished their first year, and you find a house or you find an apartment in town with some friends, right? But that means you've got to start commuting. And commuting is a hell of a thing, especially in a country where the trains or the buses or God knows what public transport sector employees are going to go on strike at any given time. And even if they're working, they're not showing up on time, right? You're getting delayed trains here and there. You're getting cancelled buses. You sit there waiting for something, expecting to get a connection later. No. And then even if, for all of that effective mental torture, you're having to pay exorbitant prices for the privilege. I remember, and even it's not just a UK thing. I know in Hong Kong, the MTR, which is our version of a rapid transit system, right? Our subway, prices have gone up extraordinarily, right? But especially it's a problem in the UK. I know to go from our university campus to let's say the seafront, right? Which is about, I know by walking it's about an hour and 45 minutes. Yeah. If I want to go into the centre of town, that'll take me about 15-20 minutes if I walked now and caught the train. Yeah. Right? Or it's an hour and a half walk, or it's a 15-minute drive. Yeah. If I want to do that, I'm having to pay a lot of money. Right? If I take a bus, that's what they've just upped the price from £2 to £3 for a single.
For a single, so that could be that's only 2-3 stops. If you know that is technically a single, so you could be going a few stops down the road, paying your £3 for essentially what, a 5-minute bus journey.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people would say, you know, you can walk, but what about people who, you know, for example, maybe the elderly or people who are less able? How, you know, the prices are just
is that the operative term now? Less able? I'm not sure.
Either, but
I hear a lot of it changes every month at this point.
But yeah, it's definitely ridiculous. I mean,
so if you're not tech savvy, you know, like I like to call myself tech savvy, but I still haven't been bothered to open the Brighton bus app at any point. If you're not trying and going onto the Brighton bus app to buy a return ticket for what's that, £5?
£4 at the moment for students. Which
£4 for students, that's not bad. Well, but for like a standard, like a normal person, that's what, a £5 probably, right?
Might be more, yeah.
Like if you're not actively if you're not installing the app, if you're a person who doesn't have a phone, you're having to pay a £1 or £2 premium a day for your commute, and that adds up. And if you want the privilege of a monthly pass, that's £68. £68 a month for buses specifically within the Brighton and Hove area, and that's not that large of an area, right? I can go to town, which is maybe a 25-minute bus journey, and I can come back and I can do fuck all else, right? When I was over the summer, I spent about a month, 3 weeks, right, in Germany, and I was staying in the outskirts of Frankfurt, and in a town called Offenbach. And the place I was working at for this internship was on the outskirts of Offenbach, right? That was about an hour commute every day. because of just the infrequency of trains, and I had to get a bus to get another bus to get to a train station and then walk 30 minutes to get to the office, right? That would have cost me €9 return per day, which is ridiculous, right? If you're trying to go somewhere and work, I mean, what's the minimum wage in Germany? Probably like €14 at this point, 12. That's basically an hour's work just to get to and from work. But fortunately in Germany, in order to alleviate some of the burden that is being placed upon the average working man, they've introduced what's known as a Deutschland ticket, right? For €52, you can take all the trams, buses, subways, regional trains, local trains, anything you want that isn't an intercity high-speed train. But even then, they don't even matter, because the high-speed trains aren't even high-speed. And half the time, they don't even exist. They just don't show up. But for €52, that's an entire month of public transportation. That's ridiculous. When I was there, any time I finished work early or any time I had a weekend, I was getting on a train somewhere. If I wanted to do that here, I'm having to pay for that.
I mean, yeah, even from Brighton to London, for example, if you want to do that, I think the cheapest off-peak might be £20-25, and it's an hour's train journey there, hour back, and as we said before, you're lucky if it doesn't get cancelled, delayed. I mean,
or even if you get on the train, it's going to be incredibly crowded. Especially, I think a big part of why a big part of why the UK isn't as London-centric as it is because of the existence or the ability for people who live in Brighton, for people who live in, God forbid, Milton Keynes, or like Luton. You can commute to London, and then you're bringing money out of London into these local communities like Brighton, and then you have people who live in Eastbourne commuting to Brighton and bringing money from Brighton to Eastbourne. It's sort of, I hate to say trickle-down economics because Ronald Reagan was a moron, but it's regional trickle-down economics, right? Now, when it's becoming more and more expensive to try and commute, and it's becoming more and more difficult to even get that commute that you paid money for, what's going on? Especially considering how much of a push we're getting from the government, from companies, from everyone, every sector, every facet of the world to try and go green. And we can't even build a high-speed train link between Birmingham and London.
It's true, yeah. I mean, that HS2 is, I think it was meant to be originally opening date of 2033, which already is that's quite a long way, but that's been delayed to about a further 5-6 years, possibly. And also, I mean, it's all well and good having these, we're building the infrastructure for these high-speed, London to Birmingham, Birmingham to the north, if that even still happens. But how much are these tickets going to be? I mean, because obviously speed for a lot of people is going to impact, everyone's going to want to be on the train, on the faster one. So prices are going to go up. So is it really going to benefit a lot of people if, potentially a lot of people are priced out of it anyways, because you can't afford to go on the really fast train when the slower train is, for example, £50-60 cheaper. I mean, during rush hour or, before 9 a.m, if you're commuting, the prices, again, it's just, I get there's more demand, but it's just ridiculous. But
yeah, it's honest. And you look at how some of these other countries in the world are doing, right? For context, right? When China was building high-speed rail between their two most important cities, which is, I hate to economically compare the absolute marvel that is Shanghai to Birmingham, right? But when you're connecting your capital and your second most important city, Beijing and Shanghai, those two cities are 1,100 kilometers apart. 1,100 kilometers apart. That is twice the distance from London to Glasgow, right? They built high-speed rail between those two cities in China that are 1,100 kilometers apart. They started construction in 2008, opened in 2011. You could cover the UK twice with just that one train line that China was able to build in 3 years. How is it even acceptable for a nation like the United Kingdom that tries to bill itself, that tries to describe itself as one of the leaders in the green transition, that is constantly critiquing a country like China for how much how many fossil fuels it's pumping into the ozone. How the hell is it acceptable for the United Kingdom to so consistently lag behind everyone else in public transport development?
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely a good point. I mean, again, does it come back to, the whole collecting taxes? Does the UK have enough to fund these projects efficiently, or are they kind of doing it slowly and trying to, make work with what they've got money wise and get it done?
I mean, even then, I know there's, from political parties like the Greens, who are supposed to be the champions of the environmental cause, they've been some of the biggest obstacles in the way of something like HS2, which would stop a lot of people from driving. I don't know if it stops. Do people fly from London to Birmingham? Do people fly that?
I mean, I think
probably not. Right?
Maybe not London to Birmingham, but
London to Manchester, maybe.
Yeah, I've got a few friends who fly London to Manchester, and it's cheaper, quicker. Obviously, way worse for the environment, but if it's cheaper and quicker,
the average person's going to
go for it.
Especially with as much of a strain as people have on personal finances these days. I know there was a famous story where two friends from, I believe, Birmingham and Manchester, they wanted to meet each other, right? And they found it was cheaper for both of them to book flights from their respective British cities and go to Spain and have lunch there than it was for them to meet somewhere halfway between Birmingham and Manchester. And that's just sad. I think a lot of people, I mean, considering how much we already pay for, like, the environment, a lot of people are willing to, look at something. What's that one label that goes on products to show that it's, like, well sourced and all that?
Oh, I know. Yeah, I
it's
know.
Like it's like something green type of.
Yeah.
I forget, but anyway, people have shown before that they are willing to pay a premium if it means protecting the environment. The fact that something like carbon offset credits even exist is indicative of the fact that people are conscious of their environmental impact and they want to help. They don't want to be part of the problem. They want to leave a better world than they were born in, right? But the fact that it's so difficult for anyone to do anything and so prices. Expensive, it makes it so hard. It's and when people are like lightning or water, right? They take the path of least resistance.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the path of least resistance involves bulldozing a handful of forests just to go get lunch with your friend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's ridiculous, really. I mean, how would we go about fixing it? I mean, I imagine it's a long...
You got a gut, and I mean, one thing I would suggest, and it's an interesting thing, especially not necessarily in the UK, but in California, right? In California, I believe in the 80s, they were one of the most liberal states in the US, right? They decided to introduce a new set of environmental legislations in order to make it more difficult for these new disruptive projects to be built that are going to hurt the environment. These regulations mean that the average, like, if you want to build anything in California, you've got to submit God knows how many pages of environmental impact assessments and all that, and it's incredibly easy for anyone to block your project by saying, I need you to submit a 20-page report on how this is going to affect this specific animal, and then you turn around, you submit that report, and then suddenly there's a new animal you've got to care about, right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, these rules have made it easy for NIMBYs, right? For those of you who don't know what a NIMBY is, it means somebody says not in my backyard, right? Somebody who opposes new developments in their local area. It's become incredibly easy for these people to block these new infrastructure projects, such as the California high-speed rail. That's meant to be helping the environment by stopping people from driving, because America is such a car-centric country, right? You would expect there to be laws in place to try and make things easier, but it's the opposite. But anyway, I mean, well, it's nearly 8 o'clock in the UK.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know what's happened, right? We walked into an MC. There's supposed to be somebody playing some music before me, and there's supposed to be somebody playing some music after me, right? But the person before me didn't show up, and it's nearly 7:59. The person after me hasn't shown up. But out of courtesy, And out of respect for my guests' time and for my own time as well. I mean, I've got nothing to do. Out of respect for both of us, I've got to have dinner, I guess. Out of respect for us and for all of you listeners at home, this is where we're going to call it a show.
Yep.
Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm going to be back. This guy's going to get fed to a wood chipper, probably.
Fed to the pizza machine. We're going to
test cheeky 24-hour pizza.
Let you know how that is next week.
So tune in next week. I'm going to have a different guest on. Tune in every week. There's going to be a different guest on. This has been The Deep End. Again, with the Adult Swim thing, I need to find out like an outro. You know, something like go swim, go put on a life vest, you know, swim to shore or some shit, right? But yeah, anything you would like to say to our beloved audience of however many people, because I still haven't figured out how to look.
I'm sure to the hundreds of thousands of listeners, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully we've covered some interesting topics for you guys, and yeah, thank you very much for having me, Alex.
It's been a pleasure. I think there's a button somewhere to play you all out, but I'm just going to turn off both of our microphones, and in a few seconds you're going to be listening to the lovely automation playlist that was put together by someone probably 10 years ago. So, goodbye.